So Lynn and I is going to talk to you now for about half an hour about what you need to do for preparation. So what you need in your unit, because actually it's all fine. And probably you've got your unit set up for ISTE, maybe you don't. Thomas, I think, does. But when I came here to Ghent, there was absolutely no setup for submucosal endoscopy. So they didn't have any of the kit. They didn't have any of the what we're going to go through in this talk, which is the whole gamut of things that you need, from patient preparation, from a culture of how the patient is admitted and what they need, from the practical things that you need set up in the room, like a flushing pump and your endoscope tower, the sort of imaging you need, the right scope type, the caps, et cetera, et cetera. So you need a whole 360 view on what you need for your interventional setup before you start. So what do you need? Well, you need quite good endoscopes. So your endoscope, especially for the tunneling stuff in the esophagus, which often extends down onto the junction, especially if it's a Barrett's type population, which I don't need to tell a Glaswegian about, and you don't need to tell someone who's dealing with the practice here about. You need a scope that can retroflex, and it must be able to retroflex like this. The channel size doesn't matter so much. I'm sorry that's hidden, but I don't think it's such an issue that you have a standard gastroscope with a standard working channel. You must be using CO2. So there has been one case here where a patient had a poem on air, and that happened because the touchscreen panel of the endoscopy processor was triggered by a cable hitting it with water on it. And that patient was 5 days in hospital, face blown up like a balloon, et cetera, and is not very happy with us. And in fact, sadly, because it's always that patient, isn't it? That patient didn't get a good myotomy outcome either, had to do another poem afterwards. So you can imagine having to convince that person to do another similar experience, but we made sure that the CO2 was on that time. So if you have ever had that experience, you will know that it causes pneumothorax very quickly. You cannot use air for these procedures. The air must be off. You must check CO2. And I can just remember the voice of my trainer in my ear. Distal attachment is critical, and there are different types of distal attachments with more tapered ends to let you get into tunnels. So you need that. The commonest one is the ST hood from Fujifilm. So if you don't have that in your department, if you're going to do tunneling procedures, you should get it. Imaging is critical. So you see the sort of level you will see today. We are very lucky to have the degree of imaging that we have here. The different knife types. So the one in the middle is the one we're using this is actually the prior variant, not the J. So this is the older one. It had a bigger tip. It didn't have a jet function. This new one has a smaller tip and a jet function. And it's the triangle tip knife, not J, this one, but the J is the one we now use. You'll see it in real life. Any questions on that? What I haven't mentioned is I'll stop screen sharing. What I haven't mentioned is the rest of the approach, right? So I haven't mentioned, and will mention throughout this, the things you say to the patient up front, things you consent the patient for or not. And I do think these procedures require dedicated patient consent with dedicated pros and cons said to the patient. We'll show you some evidence base for these procedures later so that you can provide some numbers, because the smart patient often comes in with the question, well, what other options do I have, and how good is this option, and what adverse events come with this option? So usually we feel pretty good as endoscopists, I think, about the adverse events, because we don't have to worry too much about them.